ultimately, it means the same thing it's meant from the beginning, and it means the same thing it means in any culture. Culture, in some sense, is something that we have to engage with, and some of our methods and sometimes the way that we present things or the way things look can change culturally. Part of this is, a simple example of this is just language in general. When the Reformation happened, you had this great disturbance, this great conflict about moving the words of the liturgy and the Mass from Latin to German, which was the language of the common people. And so what was happening was lots of people went to Mass, but they didn't really know, they couldn't really understand what was being said. They just knew that it was something about God and they needed to be there. When the move happened to make the words, to change the words into the common tongue, there was some pushback on that. There'll always be pushback on that. The same thing happened when lots of Christian groups moved to this country, and some came from Norway, and some came from Germany, and some came from Finland, and they set up churches, and they had these churches doing church in those tongues. And eventually, as time went on, people had children, and those children spoke English. And it makes evangelism impossible when you move to a place and you decide that you're going to do church in that tongue. And so they move it to English. We face the same thing. Now we all speak English, but there are cultural differences depending on where part of the country you live in, what cities you live in, whether you're rural or urban, wherever it is, south, or if you're on the East Coast or the West Coast, and there's tweaks that can be made that can engage with culture. But ultimately what it means to be a Christian in today's culture is not any different than what it means to be a Christian in any culture, in any time or any place. What it means to be a Christian is to be one who has abandoned all hope in himself, that has abandoned all sufficiency in himself, has found himself to be bankrupt of the things he needs, primarily righteousness before God, and has thrown himself completely on the grace and mercy of God, where he has found that everything he needs is freely provided for him. That's what it means to be a Christian. The implications of this are what Paul says. Because of that, because we know this, and we know that God loves people, that God so loved the world, that the motivation behind the incarnation was nothing less than the divine love of God. God loved the world, and he gave his Son. Because of that, we know that God loves his creation, and so we regard no one according to the flesh. This is what Paul says. And what that means is that we don't look at anyone as just merely flesh and blood. We look at everyone as an object of God's mercy and compassion and love. We do that no matter what. That's what Christians should be doing in any culture, in any time, in any place. That we should engage in ways that are helpful, that people can understand, that are relatable. But what we're engaging them with is the gospel that has saved us. And what we regard them as is someone who is profoundly loved and desired by God. And we try to do that in ways that they can understand, and in ways that are helpful. Some of our tactics have not always been helpful. So that's what I think it means to be a Christian. It doesn't mean checking a certain political box. It doesn't mean going to a certain kind of church. It doesn't mean homeschooling or public schooling your kids. It means that in all these arenas, whatever it is that you choose to do, that you don't regard people as merely people, but as people who bear the image of God, who God loved enough that he gave his Son.